Okay, negative harmony. Here we go. Doesn't exist. But, to satisfy the nerds, we'll go into it. Ernst Levy published this book, Theory of Harmony, in 85. He died in 81, but somebody published it in 85. Ernst was a Swiss dude, theoretician, composition teacher, composer. Taught at New England Conservatory, MIT, yada, 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 fancy pants. He looked like this. And the book is a collection of sexually repressed jargon relating to the Undertone series. And, yeah, it's not scientific. Undertone series doesn't exist, but you can create whatever you'd like to create around anything. And this is just a fantastic waste of time. Do not read the book. I read this exhausting tome, so you don't have to. Here we go. The literal first words of the book are these. The raw material of theories are facts. The raw material of musical theory is music. Music is not, as some contemporary acousticians would like us to believe, something that happens in the air. It is something that first and last happens in the soul. To an inner, spiritual something corresponds an outer, physical something. Tone. Whatever the fuck that means. We're then confronted with the Pythagorean table, which is extremely old, and it's composed of interpenetrating overtone and undertone series, which sounds way more exciting than it actually is. Each chapter begins with a quote, a technique I'm actually quite fond of. This one is, "The world is one. It began to develop from the middle," from Fellatio. Ernst is up front, tells you right away the main endeavor of this paper is to show that musical norms are psychophysical facts, not conventional fictions. Again, whatever the fuck that means. And, let you know that you're in for a real treat. Then there's some more repressed stuff. The fifth is the pre-sexual interval, and, something Adam Neely talks about later. Geotropism. The plant grows in opposite directions, a stem and the root, while the flow of the sap is unidirectional. There's a lot of weird diagrams in this book, like this one illustrating the relationship between two concept pairs. We got this one talking about the natural seventh and something, and this food pyramid telling you that bread's at the top. Finally, my chief complaint about the theory of negative harmony. The bass notes. What about the bass notes? You can invert a chord around an axis, as Jacob Collier suggests, and you can invert a chord around, that's covered in the book as well, and you can invert a chord around the bottom note of the chord. So if you do the latter, C major becomes F minor, that's fine. For the first time in the book, page 23 to 24, bass notes get added to the voice leading, and for some reason, I don't know, it's an F minor with an F on the bottom. I don't get it. If you're inverting root position triads around the bottom note, you'll always end up with a root position triad. But if you're inverting around an axis, you don't end up with root position triads. What are the bass notes, and who's to say what they are? A lot of what he talks about has to do with the fact that he thinks polarity is super important. And in quite obtuse language, he contends it concerns our inability to hear a chord from above, specifically our inability to hear the minor chord generated by C as C minor instead of F minor. If a hypothesis could be found explaining the contradiction between the generation of the minor triad according to the string experiment, that's covered earlier, and our mode of perceiving it, and if such a hypothesis could be proved fertile, and at the same time in accordance with the postulates of musicality, holy shit, the inherent superiority of the polarity concept over the turbidity concept could then generally prevail in harmonic theory. Yeah, I agree. There's a reason why that shit ain't happening. Finally, we get to some semblance of an argument over inversions. The inversions do not appear as such, strictly speaking, but as defective series. A defective series is one that at some point is cut off from its generator by an index on the wrong side. Fine. Fundamental of such a series is fictitious. Skipping. Only when the fictitiousness of the fundamental affirm itself. I can understand nobody wanted to edit this book. Then the chord is a true inversion and will no more behave as in fundamental or root position. Blah, blah. Fine. So there's your explanation. kinda, as to why the bass notes, and thus the resulting harmony, are abstract, at best. So, the post that started it all, 40 years after the world had tried to forget about it. Jacob Collier, eating fruit with Herb, posting on social media about discussing negative harmony with Herbie Hancock. Jacob is obviously a savant, and he knows his shit, for sure. That being said, I'm still left with the same questions about negative harmony. Like, does it exist, or is it just a creative way of analyzing something that's already there? Well, whatever. It was posted by June Lee, who seems to be a pretty decent theoretician in his own right. So yeah, take it away, Jake.
I saw the post of you discussing negative harmony with Herbie Hancock.
Yeah.
So what is that?
Oh,
Oh, shit.
So this, it's funny, that's kind of linked to the last question, but this guy, Ernst Levy, he wrote a book a few years ago, like a few decades ago, called A Theory of Harmony, and he's from Europe or something. And this book, it's like a classical composition book from quite, I guess, long enough ago that jazz education wasn't a thing. So
Ernst Levy died in 81. The book was published in 85. Jazz education was absolutely a thing. He just didn't care anything about it.
he thinks very classically about things. But his idea is that harmony can exist. And any chord in any key has a reflection, a polar opposite chord within that key center, based on rotating every single note around the axis of the key center. So,
right. So it shouldn't matter whether it's a minor key or a major key. All this negative harmony stuff applies to a major key, probably just because minor harmony functions way differently, but in terms of tensions and things. But the plagal cadence that he's talking about gets reflected or negativized, like an F to C in C gets negativized into minor 5, so G minor to C. The problem that I have is it doesn't take into account anything except for classical chord progressions, which admittedly all jazz standards are. But take something like Sweet Home Alabama, right? This standard piece of pop music, D, C, G, the chords, and that gets reflected into C minor, D minor, G. You play them both for yourself and see if it lines up. I don't think it does.
for example, if you're in C, between C and G, that's your axis. So if I have the chord of G7, that has a negative version, and what I do is I reflect every note of that chord G7 over the axis of C and G, which actually is like between E and E flat.
And there's a real nice Italian guy. I think he's Italian. He's got a channel called Music Theory for Guitar, and we'll get to that later, but this is his explanation of what he meant between E and E flat. You can look at the axis this way. And you might ask yourself, why is it not F sharp, the axis, splitting the octave in half? You just simply get told that it's C to G. I think this comes out of the Levy book. I think he just does this so he can make the theory fit. Certainly doesn't have any specific musical reason to be C to G instead of C to anything else.
So G becomes C, and then B becomes A flat, D becomes F, and F becomes D.
So it's like D half diminished?
So it's like F minor 6. Yeah, D half diminished, F minor 6.
Here's one of my fundamental problems also. It reflects a harmony, sure. The notes C, A flat, F, and D. Is it D half diminished over D, or is it F minor 6 over F? The bass notes don't seem to be taken into account. They don't even get taken into account in Levy's book. It just explains the overall harmonic sound, which changes with the bass note. So if in a G7 chord the G got reflected into a C, is that then D half diminished over C, or F minor 6 over C? I don't know. I've never found a decent explanation for this, and it's not here either.
But that is like, we all know that sound, like F minor 6 to C major. That's like, like a minor plagal cadence.
Yeah.
It has the same amount of gravity than G7 does, because the voice leading is equivalent. All of the notes have the same amount of gravity to the thing, but like the A flat and F minor 6 wants to sink to the G in the same way that the B wants to rise. So what?
Again, what are the bass notes? D half diminished going to C is way different than an F minor 6 going to C. So he's right about the voice leading, of course, but in terms of the plagal cadence, you wouldn't get a plagal cadence necessarily unless the bass note was F.
What Ernst talks about is this idea of that polarity like the gravity is as strong, but it's kind of like it converts everything perfect to plagal. And then if you think about that kind of thing, you know, A7, D7, G7, C becomes E flat minus 6, B flat minus 6, F minus 6 to C. And that's really epic. It sounds like really warm and wonderful, but it doesn't sound like really unfamiliar. It just sounds like it's coming from the other side of the circle of fifths, basically, which is like very in touch with what I feel about circle of fifths.
Right. Obviously, no qualitative judgment exists, whether it's musically qualitative or in real life, without something to compare it to. In this case, we're comparing everything to C because that's the tone center we're in. However, that doesn't sound like it's coming from the other side of the circle of fifths so much to me as it sounds like a completely different set of chords. No, use them if you want, but don't pretend it's got the same tension because it's also selective in terms of which chords you use because, 5 to 1, yeah, I understand, but what about a 5-4-1, 5 to 4 to 1 in C, G, F to C, becomes F minor to G minor to C. It's just not the same thing. Or do you just borrow one chord or a couple of chords out of his thing? So 5 to 4 to 1, G to G minor to C, or F minor to F to C. And here's Adam Neely, another smart guy who talks fast and says a lot of things. And he glazes over Jacob's whole approach pretty much with inverting over a key center. He goes into a lot of undertone series stuff. But what he does not do is answer any questions about what negative harmony is. Check.
About this idea, which he calls polarity. Positive polarity and negative polarity. He doesn't call it that, but I'm going to call it that. Basically, there's the overtone series, and that's positive. That's things growing up from the note C. And
I'll excuse him paraphrasing Ernst Levy here. He only really speaks about it for a bit in the book, but it's not positive. It's not growing up from C. It's occurring at the exact same time as C. And undertones don't.
The overtone series. And the overtone series, if you aren't familiar with it, it's basically the series of notes which ring out sympathetically.
Skip!
You invert that major triad and those first couple of overtones, you get a minor triad. And you actually get a minor triad based on F. So the inversion of a C through an undertone series is an F minor chord. It's a very interesting sort of back and forth between the two of them.
It's not an interesting back and forth between the two of them because there is no back and forth. It's either one or the other, right? I mean, you're replacing one idea with another one. Also, if you noticed, we got off topic from Jacob's approach anyway because the C major chord, we're not talking about key center anymore. The F minor was a inversion of a G7, or a G chord anyway, in Jacob's theory. So this is something different. I'm not sure what rotating things around the bottom note means, but Jacob seems to be referring to dualism. And invented by this dude, Hugo Riemann. And as you can see on the chart on the right, which also has a mistake in it because both ending triads are major and the bottom right triad should be a C minor triad. But regardless, it seems to me that this is just a way to make the theory fit again, right? You can get that scale, you can get a natural minor scale if you start on that G and go down with this series of whole steps and half steps. It's just, you're just inventing something around something to make something fit that you invented, seems to me.
One great analogy that Ernst Levy has in his book is the idea of geotropism, which is the tendency of a plant to grow upwards. Then there's also the stem below. And we're only ever seeing the stalk above, which is the overtone series, but then there's all this like hidden world below that we never really get a chance to see.
If we don't get a chance to see it, or in our case, hear it, it says it right there. What's the point? What are we talking about?
And so it's a very useful theoretical concept if you're looking to try and expand your ideas beyond what necessarily major and minor are, but think about them as reflections of one another.
There's a fundamental problem here too. First of all, why would you want to think about them as reflections of one another? They're different sounds. Second of all, every piece that's major shifts between major and minor keys or chords anyway. You could just stay, you would have the same gravity if you just stayed in major or minor, right? Why bother shifting between the two if all we're trying to do is deal with gravity? It's just creating problems where there are none and unnecessary over-analysis of things that have already been analyzed to death.
But the thing that I find so fascinating is that the overtone series exists in nature and the undertone series doesn't.
True.
And that, immediately I think about like the idea of matter and antimatter, or like the positively charged electron or the negatively charged proton. Why is matter in this energy so much more prevalent than antimatter? Why is the overtone series existent versus the undertone series?
Now, aside from him misspeaking about positively charged electrons, whatever, negatively charged electrons and positively charged protons is still not correct, because the antiparticle to a negatively charged electron is a positively charged positron. More importantly, though, when antiparticles meet each other, they destroy each other. That's what I call negative harmony.
And I realize this combination, or like this analogy, is a little bit specious.
A little bit.
But at the same time, it got me thinking along these lines about the fundamental nature of reality and what we consider this polarity, light and dark, positive and negative.
And some other opposites of each other that don't necessarily have to do with what we're talking about.
Where are we going with the music? Because if you think about how you might reflect all of the chords within, like, say, a 2-5-1 chord progression, D minor 7 would be E minor 7, the reflection of a G7, A minor 7 flat 5, and then the reflection of a C major 7 is a D flat major 7. So
not in anything Jacob was talking about, that's for sure. Has no key center, he's just reflecting everything around the bottom note.
why isn't harmony E minor 7, A minor 7 flat 5, D flat major 7, which you would never see in the real world? That is true negative harmony.
Is it?
And we don't hear that, but why don't we?
I heard it. It sounded like those chords. Just didn't sound like anything relating to the initial chords.
So these are just some of the ideas to think about with reflections and negative harmony and polarity that maybe you can investigate further if you do want to read more of that book by Ernst Levy, A Theory of Harmony.
Don't read that book. Go play with your wife or something. This is Rick Beato, his take on negative harmony. Rick is in my opinion, the best music channel on YouTube. The guy's got his shit together in every aspect. He spends a long time talking about palindromes and modes reflecting into other modes. Just if you start on a C Ionian and go up, and then you keep it on C and go down with the same number of, or the same arrangement of steps and half steps, then you get C Phrygian. It's cool, but what it does for me is highlight exactly what I'm saying about negative harmony, which is it doesn't exist. It's just some nerdy analytical way of looking at things. And John Lennon upside down looks like Paul McCartney, but only one of them was a good songwriter.
When I play a chord, it produces a separate overtone series for each note in the chord. So if I play this chord here, the B flat will have its own overtone series. F, G, C, E, F will all have its own overtone series.
There's only one thing to correct in Rick's video. That's it. And it's they would have their own overtone series, bouncing around with each other if you were not playing an electric piano. Electric piano just tries to approximate overtones, which is why an electric piano sounds fake and a real piano sounds real.
If I were to play the two chord scales together simultaneously in contrary motion, it would sound like this.
Now that's what a real piano sounds like, or at least a very well sampled one. And Rick goes on for some time here, standing in front of a whiteboard with a C Ionian stacked on top of a G Phrygian, explains the relations. Yeah, it's fine. It's just another way of looking at a relative minor. How do we arrive at that? Who cares? It doesn't take into account music without a key center. So there goes film music most of the time, and there goes some weirdo pop music. The first thing that strikes me when I look at the whiteboard is a C Ionian going up and a C Aeolian going down, starting on C. Fine, C Aeolian is G Phrygian if you start on G, and I realize we're talking about the chords built on these scales here, not just the modes themselves. It just looks like another way to analyze C natural minor and the chords built on that. Oddly enough, Levy speaks of this too in his book. However, he destroys it and says that it's impossible because of something that he invented. And you can see both of these cadences that he's talking about in the bottom left, they're 1-4-5 cadences, or not even cadences, 1-4-5 progressions, showing that, again, he's just thinking about classical harmony, but that Aeolian scale is there. Whatever. It's like inventing a new way to hang a light bulb, like anybody was waiting on that, and then writing a book about how to hang light bulbs. and then getting together with your friend and eating fruit and talking about how to hang light bulbs. Here we are back at the real nice Italian guy, Music Theory for Guitar, and he writes his axis down this way, explains, again, what Jacob was talking about, or Ernst Levy was talking about. I only mention him in here because he starts to deal with some pop progressions, too. And I got more questions. I've also known a lot of theoreticians in my day, and none of them had a beard like that. Right on, brother. He gets a lot more into how the notes want to move to get to the next chord or whatever, which I suppose is a key point in terms of that tension. And he goes on here to take a standard 1-6-4-5 doo-wop progression and talk about replacing the A minor chord with an E flat, replacing the 5 chord, the G, with the F minor. That's fine. We all know what that is by now. And then explain that it doesn't sound very good, and you could just pick and choose these chords, substitute them out whenever you like them. I agree it doesn't sound very good, but what about the point we were just talking about, that the tension in the chord wants to resolve to something else? I mean, it's a nice thought. The E flat might have as much tension in relation to C as A minor does, but it doesn't have as much tension in relation to F as A minor did, with 2 common notes. I don't know. I'm at a loss. And we move on to some other examples of, oh no, still on the same thing. You could substitute the F for the G minor, and he calls this meh. I also call it meh, just like I call the rest of it. Yeah, main question, what do you substitute? Are there any rules? I mean, do you have to substitute every chord in order to preserve the tension? I don't know. The E flat does have 2 common notes going to G minor. Yeah, okay, the tension's the same if you substitute every chord. Fine, but does that mean that you have to take your whole composition and substitute? Ooh, there's that beard again. That you have to substitute all the chords in order to preserve the effect? Or can you just pick and choose? If you're just picking and choosing, I would say that's just called putting a different chord down. And again, where's my goddamn bass notes? If this book were a scientific article looking to get peer-reviewed and perhaps published, it would never pass muster, man. Go write music and use any chords you like and stop over-analyzing stuff.